I bet you didn't know that 95% of Australia is empty. Australia brings to mind lively cities, unique animals, and vast sunny landscapes. From the busy streets of Sydney and Melbourne to the beautiful Great Barrier Reef, Australia captures our imagination. Its special plants and animals like the kangaroo and koala are known worldwide. But behind this beautiful image, Australia is one of the least populated countries. Even though it has a large area, the number of people living here is very low compared to other places. While the cities are full of life, most of the interior is empty. The difference between the busy cities and the empty outback is clear. In the cities, you find a mix of cultures, busy businesses, and a lively art scene. This big difference makes us wonder, why is 95% of Australia empty? What has caused people to live in such uneven numbers across this big land? The answer is a mix of history and geography. The tough climate of the interior with its dry deserts and extreme temperatures makes it hard for many people to live there. To understand why people are spread out unevenly in Australia, we need to look at the past and see what has shaped this land. The story of Australia's population is about moving, adapting, and surviving. From the ancient caretakers of the land, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, who have lived here for tens of thousands of years, adapting to the different environments of the continent, to the arrival of European settlers in the late 18th century who brought new ways of living, technologies, and a different relationship with the land. Australia's story is one of strength, change, and adaptation. The indigenous people faced big challenges when the Europeans arrived, leading to major changes in their way of life. This story is written into the land itself, showing the power of both people and nature. The land has been shaped by old traditions, colonial goals, and modern developments. Join me as we travel across this big continent, discovering the secrets of its empty spaces. We will explore the remote outback, the lush rainforests, and the coastal areas, each with its own story, and find out why 95% of Australia is still empty. Through this journey, we will understand more about the land, its people, and the forces that shape this amazing country. For tens of thousands of years before the arrival of Europeans, Aboriginal Australians thrived in this challenging environment. They adapted to the diverse and often harsh landscapes of the continent, from the arid deserts to the lush rainforests, developing a deep connection with the land that sustained them. They developed intricate systems of knowledge, art, and spirituality, living in harmony with the land and its rhythms. Their art, often depicting the Dreamtime stories, reflects a profound understanding of their environment and their place within it. These stories were not just myths, but a way to pass down essential knowledge about survival, the seasons, and the natural world. Their deep understanding of the environment allowed them to survive in areas that would later be deemed uninhabitable by European settlers. They knew how to find water in the desert, how to track animals, and which plants were edible or medicinal. This knowledge was passed down through generations, ensuring the survival of their communities. These first Australians were not passive inhabitants of the land, but active shapers of it. They used fire to manage the landscape, a practice known as fire stick farming, which promoted the growth of certain plants and created habitats for animals. This method of land management was sustainable and ensured the health of ecosystems. Through practices like controlled burning, they managed the landscape, ensuring the health of ecosystems and the sustainability of their food sources. This practice reduced the risk of large, uncontrollable wildfires and encouraged the growth of new vegetation, which in turn supported a diverse range of wildlife. Their presence is woven into the very fabric of Australia, a testament to their enduring connection to this ancient land. The land was not just a place to live, but a part of their identity, their culture, and their spirituality. This connection to the land is still evident today in the traditions and practices of Aboriginal communities. However, this delicate balance was shattered with the arrival of British colonists in 1788. The newcomers brought with them a different worldview, one that saw the land as a commodity to be owned and exploited. This clash of cultures had immediate and devastating effects on the Aboriginal way of life. The newcomers saw Australia through a different lens, viewing the land primarily as a source of resources to be exploited. They introduced new animals, plants, and farming practices that disrupted the existing ecosystems. The land was cleared for agriculture, and the natural balance that had been maintained for millennia was irrevocably altered. This clash of perspectives had devastating consequences for the indigenous population and set in motion a chain of events that would shape the demographic landscape of Australia for centuries to come. The introduction of new diseases, displacement from their lands, and violent conflicts led to a dramatic decline in the Aboriginal population. Despite these challenges, Aboriginal Australians have shown remarkable resilience and continue to fight for their rights and recognition of their cultural heritage. The arrival of the British marked a significant turning point in Australian history, forever altering the landscape and the lives of its indigenous inhabitants. Driven by a belief in their own superiority and a desire for expansion, the colonists claimed vast tracts of land. This aggressive acquisition led to the displacement of Aboriginal communities, disrupting their traditional way of life that had been sustained for thousands of years. This dispossession was often violent, leading to widespread conflict and loss of life. The indigenous people resisted, but the colonists, armed with advanced weaponry in greater numbers, often overpowered them. The introduction of foreign diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza had a devastating impact on the indigenous population. These diseases spread rapidly, causing high mortality rates among the Aboriginal people. Lacking immunity to these new illnesses, Aboriginal communities were decimated by epidemics, their numbers plummeting. Entire communities were wiped out, leaving survivors to cope with the loss of their loved ones and the breakdown of their social structures. This demographic collapse further weakened their ability to resist colonization and exacerbated their displacement from their ancestral lands. The loss of population meant fewer people to defend their territories and maintain their cultural practices. As the colony grew, so too did the demand for land and resources. The British settlers sought to exploit the land for agriculture and livestock, leading to further encroachment on Aboriginal territories. The British established vast pastoral properties, introducing sheep and cattle that competed with native wildlife for grazing land. This not only altered the natural environment, but also disrupted the ecological balance that the Aboriginal people had maintained for generations. This transformation of the landscape further marginalized Aboriginal communities, pushing them further into the interior and disrupting their traditional hunting and gathering practices. The loss of access to their traditional lands and resources forced many Aboriginal people into dependency on the colonial economy, further eroding their autonomy and cultural identity. Despite these challenges, Aboriginal communities showed remarkable resilience. They adapted to new circumstances, finding ways to survive and preserve their cultural heritage amidst the ongoing pressures of colonization. Today, there is a growing movement to recognize and revive Aboriginal culture and history. Efforts are being made to address past injustices and to ensure that the voices and stories of Aboriginal people are heard and respected. Section 4. The scourge of disease. The impact of introduced diseases on the Aboriginal population cannot be overstated. Smallpox, in particular, ripped through indigenous communities like wildfire. With no prior exposure and therefore no immunity, entire communities were wiped out within a matter of weeks. The British, whether through deliberate action or callous indifference, often failed to contain the spread of these diseases. This neglect had devastating consequences, decimating the Aboriginal population, and leaving a legacy of trauma and loss that continues to this day. The introduction of new diseases was not just a biological tragedy, but also a cultural one. As elders and knowledge holders succumbed to illness, generations of accumulated wisdom and tradition were lost. This loss of cultural continuity further weakened Aboriginal communities, making it even more difficult for them to resist the onslaught of colonization. Section 5. Dispossession and conflict. The expansion of British settlements inevitably led to conflict with Aboriginal communities defending their land and way of life. These conflicts, known as the Frontier Wars, were brutal and widespread, lasting for over a century in some regions. Aboriginal people resisted fiercely, utilizing their knowledge of the land and guerrilla tactics to challenge the superior firepower of the colonists. However, they were ultimately outmatched and outgunned, facing a relentless enemy determined to claim their land. The consequences of these conflicts were devastating. Thousands of Aboriginal people were killed, and countless others were displaced from their ancestral lands. The violence and trauma of this period cast a long shadow over Australian history, shaping relations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians for generations to come. Section 6. A land of extremes. Beyond the human factors, Australia's geography itself has played a significant role in shaping its population distribution. Much of the continent is characterized by harsh and unforgiving environments, posing significant challenges to human habitation. The vast interior of Australia is dominated by arid deserts, receiving very little rainfall and experiencing extreme temperatures. These deserts, while undeniably beautiful, are notoriously difficult to live in, lacking reliable water sources and supporting only sparse vegetation. The lack of reliable rainfall and fertile soil makes traditional agriculture nearly impossible in these regions. While Aboriginal people developed ingenious techniques to survive in these conditions, European-style agriculture proved largely unsustainable, limiting the potential for large-scale settlement.